Jeff,
Perfect.
thanks for agreeing to chat with me today. You are the author of Someone Who Isn't Me, out now on Rose Books. But you are likely more well known as the frontman of Thursday and other bands. I've also recently learned that you're a record producer and that you produced My Chemical Romance's debut, which is very cool. As I mentioned, your novel is published by Rose Books, which is run by Chelsea Hodson, one of my favorite people from the literary world. So it's a little bit funny to me that I've taken this long to read your book, which is incredible, by the way.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. But I think I have to air a little bit of my adolescent pretension here before we move forward. I remember hearing about your novel a couple of years ago, and I didn't know who you were at the time. But I kept seeing mentions on social media that Someone Who Isn't Me was written by the guy from Thursday. And I recall thinking to myself, I remember Thursday. I bought at least one of their CDs in high school. But Jeff, I was a shitty little metal kid back then, and I'm going to guess that your records weren't heavy enough for me, or there was perhaps too much singing. So in my head, Thursday was this mid-level band adjacent to a lot of hardcore acts I was listening to in the early 2000s. I've since realized you've sold over 1 million records, and several of my Instagram acquaintances recently filmed you performing at an arena show on the East Coast. So I'm wondering what the fuck you're doing here on this tiny YouTube channel with me, and also thank you. Uh, but more to the point, I'm starting to realize why your book feels a bit more polished than much of what I'm used to reading in indie literature. Before we get into the content of your novel, I'd love to get a big picture view of how these puzzle pieces fit together. What is your relationship to Chelsea Hodson and Rose Books? And were you interested in this independent literature scene prior to writing the book, or you tell me?
Yeah, okay, let's see. A lot to unpack here. Yeah, I have been kind of like a nerdy reader for a long time. And so yes, I've been interested in indie literature for a long, long time. Although, when I started writing, and I had an agent and stuff. She got me into way more underground stuff than I had been into before. You know what I mean? I think,
Really?
yeah, she was the one who was like, "Oh, but do you know this person's writing? Do you know this press? Have you ever heard of this kind of stuff?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then when I got to be friends with Chelsea, she got me way deeper too.
Right.
Um, stuff like Apocalypse and stuff like that. It was like I didn't know any of that stuff. Blake Butler was somebody that like my agent got me into and stuff like that. So, my
Interesting.
underground chops sort of like got to like Scott McClanahan, his wife, Juliet
Right.
Escoria, and that was kind of like probably the lowest, of the underground. It's as far down as I got. So yeah, so it was like, I really got deeper into underground lit after that. But I've always been like, I would take a summer on tour and say, like, well, I can't talk because I'll lose my voice. So this summer I'm going to read all of Pynchon. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Um,
I love
and
that.
yeah, it's my band would always be like, "Oh, we're playing Reading Festival. Jeff's over there on the side, like trying to finish Infinite Jest or whatever." That was probably like summer 2003 or four. Um, that's just like that's kind of where I lived in the band was that we had a social butterfly, and that's our drummer Tucker. The reason that other bands love us is because they love Tucker. What I mean? It's not because they love me.
Oh, I mean,
Um,
right.
so 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 like what I mean? Every band has its own like little dynamic, and I was just the guy that was always reading something.
So,
And
so
yeah.
what is the specific relationship to Chelsea Hodson? How did you land with Rose Books?
Um, well, I think Chelsea and Monica, my agent is Monica, they were tweeting each other about how much they loved um Thursday one day. And I like, well, whenever a cool, interesting looking woman who seems smart is tweeting about you, you're like, this is cool. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
Like,
understand.
I want to know who these people are. So I looked them up and was like, oh, they're writers. That's really cool. Like, I'm working on this book, and like, maybe I should pick one of their brains and find out what I should do with it, you know? And then I got to know Monica and I found out that she already repped like writers that I loved, you know? And that was very like eye opening, like, oh, she's somebody that already helps all these people that I like. And then she sent me Chelsea's book.
Got it.
It was like I think it was a galley, and I read it in like probably 3.5 hours. You know what I mean? I read it immediately, like the moment I opened it, and I was like, oh man, like it was one of those feelings of like I still got to do a lot of work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
people that are aware of me or that are fans of my music that are still so much better writers than I am. Like, you know what I mean? It was just a real wake up call. Like, okay, I actually I don't want to just be like the guy from that band who wrote a book and it's okay, you know, but we like
Sure.
him. So that was kind of like my entree into knowing about Chelsea. And then I did some deep dives on stuff that she was into, and that was really eye opening too. And then at some point, Monica, when I had like what I'd call like a finished, and I'd say that in quotes because I think it was maybe draft 8 or 9, not draft, like I think we published draft 12.
Okay.
When I got to like draft 8 or 9, Monica was like, I think Chelsea would probably take a look at it for you. Like I've read like 6 drafts at this point and I've marked them up. And Monica was kind of like, I may be getting to the point where I don't know what's good anymore in this book. I've read it as much as you have. So like, let's try sending it to somebody else, you know? And Chelsea was the first one outside of Monica and I that got to read the book. And she was so helpful, you know, because she had strong opinions and also her strong opinions on things, parts that were good were like a lot of help because I had such respect and love for Chelsea. And even like Chelsea's writing influenced the way I was writing too, where I was like, wow, she compresses. Like she'll take a complex idea and shrink it into like almost like a marketing slogan. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like she'll really boil it down to where it hits. And I was like, I need to learn to do that better. You know what I mean? I'm really taking up pages to get ideas down, and she's saying things that just hit, you know? So I was like, all right, I got to do that.
I think that's really valuable. Yeah, I mean, just to add my own quick thing here, I think she was the first person I met when I was getting serious about writing books. It was obvious that she was also already much more serious than me, much more accomplished, but she was also accessible and very kind and willing to talk to you. And I think that's a kind of a rare combination. So I'm going to move on
Yeah.
to my next question.
You know what else, real quick,
Oh yeah,
before
yeah,
we
go
get
for
off
it.
the Chelsea love
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
train?
yeah.
What I love about Chelsea is she is accessible. She'll talk to anybody. You can like almost anybody can like pay money and consult with her,
Right.
which is amazing, you know, for somebody of her level to be able to have access to basically anybody who really wants to go there is incredible. But she's also not like everything's good, everybody's good. Like she'll be like, this
Right.
isn't there. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right,
Which I
right, right.
love and respect about her, you know.
100%. Well, let's talk a little bit more about you,
Okay.
if you're
Okay.
okay with that. Specifically your novel, Someone Who Isn't Me. Midway through, I learned that the title is a reference to the way drug users refer to themselves in online forums in order to give each other advice and not incriminate themselves. In short, the novel reads like a heroin addiction memoir until it doesn't. Your protagonist is Geoff Rickly. He is,
Mhm.
at the start of the novel, addicted to heroin and doing his best to hide that fact from his girlfriend and colleagues. He works at a PR company in New York. We get the idea that his band, Thursday, has fallen apart and he's aimlessly wandering through life in search of the next fix. You start the book with an interesting formal device in which you associate the addiction drive to one's relationship to music. You write, no one ever hears music past the first time. Everything after is just a high fidelity echo. And later, if only we could hear that song one more time. This analogy to music is carried throughout the book and becomes most poignant during the section where you, or your book's extension of you, seeks help via a clinic in Mexico that offers ibogaine. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Ibogaine treatment, which is apparently a real thing. I never heard of this before reading your book. But ibogaine is a dissociative psychedelic drug that has earned a reputation for curbing or eradicating opioid cravings in drug users. And it's this section uh, about the ibogaine treatment that is arguably the most surreal and emotional part of your novel. You write these dreamlike visions of your life, fears, perceived inadequacies, etc. And as one might expect, this section is allowed to flow in a way that a traditional narrative might not, because you're writing from the perspective of your hallucinations. So I guess my question is, how much of this are we to take at face value? Were you attempting to write a memoir? And if this is all more or less true, how do you approach writing something like a hallucination, especially one that carries the extra weight of being a transformative life experience?
Oh, this is great questions. Yeah, I think, much of the novel is based in truth. But th- that the hallucination section, I would say, is the one that made me think like this has got to be a novel. You know, I don't want to like literally try and give a blow by blow of what my trip was like because for one thing, it's quite chaotic. For another thing, it felt too much like telling somebody, about your dreams. I wanted to use that as a device to write this totally surreal experimental mini novel inside the other novel. There was sort of a surrealist memoir about what being in a band is like, just because I think that sometimes, surrealist art can feel so true to life in a way that like just telling the story of what actually happened doesn't feel, sometimes just recounting your story is kind of like, yeah, it's like, how did you guys meet? It's like, well, we met. You know what I mean? Like, that's how every band starts. It's like, we met somewhere and we are like, you like music? I like music. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's
right.
on some level, I don't find that interesting. And I think as a first book, I found myself quite self conscious about like, I don't want to bore people with something that everybody has a growing up, everybody has this. I think I did go a bit far in the like, you know, your life isn't that interesting direction sometimes. But I think that's sort of my tendency as an artist anyway. Is I am an overkiller of the highest order, and so it's like why should I try and become subtle now? You know what I mean? That's not really my forte. Um, and I took that excuse that hallucination to make this other piece of art that's like formally in the vein of Dante's Inferno. Even in the beginning where it starts kind of in media res, right in the middle of this heroin addiction. That section to me is the part of the Inferno where he says, at the midway point of my life, I found myself lost in a dark woods. That was it. I was like, that's what this section's going to be. The woods are Manhattan. The darkness is the heroin. I'm in the middle of my life and I'm fucking lost. You know what I mean? That was kind of like the whole idea of the first part. So yeah, I mean, I did take some memoir classes and I thought about trying to write a memoir. And then ultimately I was like, no, I don't think that's for me. you know,
Well, from my personal opinion, I think it's quite extraordinary, and I'm very
oh,
happy you went in that direction. So, if
thank you.
anyone cares about my opinion, please buy this book. I'd be quite pleased.
That's really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean that sincerely. I'm going to move on though because of our little time here. I assume you get asked this question often as you are a musician and lyricist. You have been writing songs for most of your adult life, but as far as I know, this is your first book. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Did you find that your experience writing songs, which are essentially forms of poetry, was helpful in approaching something like a novel, or do you feel like you had to relearn the writing process for this different structure? Or better yet, describe your relationship between writing lyrics and more traditional prose.
I had to unlearn um, a lot of writing in song form is about compressing things, breaking something down further than it should go so that you can fit it. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, how much of this can I take out? And then you take out too much, the image becomes fractured, and suddenly you have something that's not what you were going for, but it can be better, because it's poetry. It's not, doesn't always have to be literal. I think, some songwriters are quite literal. The singer Touche Amore, Leonard Cohen, there's great literal songwriters out there. And I'm not always one of those. I like to break down images, take something very visual and just stretch it until it doesn't really work as the original anymore. That is not a super useful literary tool in a novel where you have a ton of room. And then when I found myself really writing lyrically and breaking images open and kind of like stretching them out to the point that they broke, did feel a little self-indulgent sometimes. I sort of like was able to use that in the hallucinations better. It worked
Yeah,
in the hallucinations better. In the parts where the narrator's super high, it works better. I tried to make it so that when he wasn't high, the language came back down to earth and became more literal, more grounded, even less sensuous, less joyful, because it's like, he's in withdrawal. It's no fun.
sure.
um, but I had to learn how to kind of take some of that out of my writing. I had to learn how to ground it in reality and physical reality. Then I had to unlearn some of that because it's like I got overly physical. And Monica, my agent, would be like, I always tell people you don't have to say like I sat down on my butt. It's like when you sit down, everybody knows what you're sitting on. You know what I mean? It's like you can unexplain some of this stuff. You can take it out. And so I had to kind of learn some of that too. But I do think that, and I'm sure that you can relate to this. It's like any any kind of an art practice gets you into learning about what makes your taste good, what makes you an interesting person. I think the love of beauty and expression is something that, you know, as long as you're practicing that in any form, you're getting something out of it. So to say like, writing songs didn't help at all would also be
Yeah.
would be totally fake. You know what I mean? You spend 20 years trying to express yourself, you learn some tricks, of course, and in songwriting, there's all kinds of different ways to tell a story. You pick somebody other than you to tell the story from the perspective of, you pick an object, you, uh, you know, there's this great song Nas wrote as a love song to his gun, you know, um, things like that. It's so many different kinds of perspectives that you can take in art. And I think getting your head around those ideas is always helpful.
I love that. Can I ask really quick? This isn't something I wrote down, but do you have a really strict writing process, either for music or for writing a novel? Like, I know some people sort of binge write their first draft in this kind of like fanatical state, and then they go back and revise, hopefully. And some people have a really slow keel, like I write this tiny bit every single day, which is more what I've
Right.
I've come into in recent years. But I'm curious how you approach this.
Yeah, with this first book, what I did was I didn't worry about how much or how little I was writing. I worried about how much time I spent writing. So
Got
if
it.
I sat down every morning and said like at least 3 hours, you're going to sit here and write, I would do that 5 days a week. Um, and what I realized, my book turned into 5 days a week, 5 hours a day, 5 years. That was how I wrote the book.
Wow.
Some days I would crank it out. Some days I'd write a couple hundred words. Some days I'd look through and read it all, and I'd take out mostly. I just I'd kill things, they didn't work, and I'd get rid of them. Um, there'd be other days I'd write 20 pages and not one of them was good, and I'd have to scrap them. But I knew that if I was there every day, inspiration would hit while I was writing, not some other time. You know what I mean? I think that happens a lot. Is like people talk about inspiration hitting. It's like, great. If it hits you when you're not writing, then what good is it? So that's kind of like it became like a practice. And I'd say that now I'm not in that practice and I'm trying to get my way back into it as a discipline because I've had so many other things. I've been on tour so much this year. Thursdays written new music. I've been writing other projects. Uh, it's a discipline I need to get back to. So
Got it. This is a weirder question. I don't read a lot of books that I would label as adjacent to the addiction memoir. We are
okay.
recording, right? Okay. But I've read several, and the majority share a similarity to the sex work memoir, which is something I'm more familiar with. And despite the fact that I've written numerous books on this subject of sex work, I feel less and less inclined to read any more of them, and here's why. I personally believe that despite how many singular and positive experiences someone might have in a career of sex work, the career as a whole is 90% of the time extremely traumatic for the individual. You can't convince me otherwise. I have too much firsthand knowledge to be swayed from this point of view. Yet the majority of contemporary literature I read from the perspective of a sex worker seems to advocate for the sense of empowerment and nuanced feminism associated with porn, prostitution, cam work, etc. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but for example, I have a friend who wrote a book some years back in which she detailed all this horrible shit that happened to her and then asserted at the end that more or less her life was great and that porn had such a positive impact on her. But as a reader, it's very hard to get on board with her conclusion because there was little to no evidence that this was true in the book itself. In addiction memoirs I've read, no one claims that, for example, heroin has empowered them. However, there's a similar masking technique I've seen employed at the end of these books. One example that comes to mind is the memoir from D.H. Peligro, drummer of the Dead Kennedys. He writes in great detail about the struggles he faced with heroin addiction, but the book ends on a high note in which he's finally gotten clean. However, there's little substance to that portion of the story, and I remember thinking to myself, this man is going to relapse and die of an overdose. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Lo and behold, he passed away in 2022 from a heroin
Oh,
fentanyl overdose,
I
which
didn't know
is
that. Yeah.
extraordinarily sad.
I
And
didn't know that. I don't know how I missed that. That's crazy.
I mean, I don't want to trivialize that, but your
Yeah.
book does something a bit different in its final act. There's a sense of triumph over your addiction or your Jeff character's addiction, yet there's more of an ambiguity as to where this will lead you.
Yeah.
The final pages depict you running away from your old dealer who approaches you in a gym locker room, and with a poetic sensibility running toward the remainder of your life and also death, while continuing to seek the full breadth of the musical echo you alluded to in the book's first chapter. I wonder if you could speak to this to the extent that you feel comfortable. What is your feeling around ending a book like this, in which there's always the opportunity to destroy the triumphant finale in your own life?
Yeah. Well, that was a really important. I kept working the ending over and over again. And one of the endings, I had been sober for a few months and like picked up a drug test and tested positive for like literally every drug on there, even ones that I had to look up because I didn't know what they were. It turned out it was expired. But I had a moment in that time where I was like, damn, I'm really fucked up. Like, I didn't even know I took all those drugs. Like, I guess I'm like so deep now that I thought I was sober. And I had a real moment of like questioning my own sanity. And like, you should have seen my girl's face. Like, she was like, damn, this motherfucker's so high. You know what I mean? Like, she was like, whoa. And I thought about ending the book with that, with this total ambiguity of like, is he so high? Like, is he still high? Because I hate this, like, I do hate in the addiction memoir, this, like, and I'm sober now and it's all good. It's like, man, you're a drug addict. Like, you don't know how this is going to go. You know what I mean? And for me, I had this picture, like, so one of the early things that I figured out in the book was like, I wanted the structure to be a spiral. I wanted it all to kind of like filter down into the point of nothingness and then go through the hole in the record. Like that was like my, and it was really hard because one of the things that I decided was like, when you play a record and it wears out really well, you can start to hear like through the tracks a little bit. I wanted
Right.
you to get that sense of like when you got to the next layer of the circle, there was a trace of the last track. So like especially in the middle of the book, the hallucinations, there's like a lot of the same like dialogue gets repeated coming out of other people's mouths. And there's like a lot of things it's like the color of this becomes the color of that and like these things start to kind of overlap on each other and I really wanted the ending to have this feeling of like okay he's sober now so he's sane, right? And it's like no, he just is the same as he ever was, and that is terrifying because he got himself in trouble the first time because
Right.
he's like this. I wanted that sense of like, and in the so I worked on this audiobook for it that's coming out very soon. And in the audiobook, there anytime the character takes a drug, there's music. So I wrote this score for it. And there's a score that comes when he uses heroin. It's like all these beautiful strings. They're a little bit dissonant, they're a little bit shaky. And as like the drug use goes on, the strings get darker and darker, kind of like everything starts to sound more dissonant and sort of like it goes from euphoria to dysphoria. And at the very end of the book, the whole last chapter of the book, the book three, I call it book three, um, there's no music. You know what I mean? Because
Oh,
he's sober, except at that very last scene that you talk about where he starts running away from his dealer, the heroin music comes back in, which to people, for
oh,
some
whoa.
people it'll be subtle, but it's like for
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people, I think they'll be like, wait a second, like he's getting ahead of himself again. He's running again. He's getting these ideas about beauty and life and seeking life that are kind of like, I don't know, that seems like it could be a problem. So, they're definitely like when it is meant to be a bit of an ambiguous ending.
Sure.
And even to the fact of like, so the beginning of the book, and this is much more subtle, maybe as a writer, this is something you picked on. The beginning of the book is in the first person present tense. Everything is happening to the narrator. Like
Yeah.
there's no space for reflection. It's just happening to him, right? That's his feeling. It's like this shit just won't stop happening. Then when he gets sober, it becomes in the past tense. He's like in this state where he can reflect and he can see things from a distance. He's got clear eyes. And in the very end of the book, it goes from past tense to present tense to he starts talking about the future tense, which is like he's really going too far now at the end. He's like, in the future. So that's kind of like it happens really quickly, like in the space of a paragraph. Not many people pick up on it, but I do think you get this feeling of launching forward at the very end of the book, and you're one of the only people that's really like kind of keyed in on the ending and how it really is a little more ambiguous than some people might like. So
I mean, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your explanation because I don't know, with any of these things that are really based around really heavy life experiences, anytime someone then just makes a very strict claim at the end that I lived happily ever after, especially when they're
yeah,
still alive, does not really ring true to me.
totally.
And yet,
Yeah,
I don't think, I mean, I don't know. I loved the way you did it. I guess I didn't pick up on the future tense switch. That's very interesting. I'd like to go
yeah,
back now that I've heard
yeah.
you talk about it in that sense.
Check that
Um,
last paragraph out.
all
It's a
right.
little bit of a trip how it goes if once you know. But the other thing that I just want to say that I think you were kind of alluding to a little bit and that like I feel strongly about is like I feel like when we like fully try and dictate like the morale, like or the more sorry, the moral of our own story,
Yeah.
there's like a really strong impulse to do that right now. It's like, well, you did this book, but you didn't say it was good. You know what I mean? So I didn't like the book because it didn't say this was good, or it didn't condemn this thing. It didn't say that was bad, and it should have said that was bad. So I know that you think it's bad, or else you're bad.
Right.
And it's like to me, that's I don't have any conclusions about what's good and bad. You know what I mean? If I were to even pretend that heroin was all bad, that would also be false. You know what I mean? Like
Fair
there are
enough.
things that were beautiful about doing heroin. Like there are impulses that I still have about seeking beauty, seeking a relief from pain. You know what I mean? Like I still want to get away from pain. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, to me, the beauty of art is that you see that the world is a complicated, strange place. You know what I mean? And that some of the things that make us who we are good, some of them are terrible, some of them are traumatic. Sometimes we benefit from trauma because we're more empathetic towards other people, but I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's not for me to say what's good and bad.
100% agree with you. And I know I made some kind of moral statements early on in that question, which I stand by actually, but it's more I actually don't have any judgment, and I can't for people who have gone through very similar experiences as me. It's just I don't like being told at the end of something that this is so great when there's just like yeah, I think it is what you're saying. It's a similar like moralizing of one's own narrative, right? And I think often in areas when we talk about people who are like marginalized in any portion of society, in the past 10 years or so, there has been this impulse, like you said, to be like, well, everything that happens in this space is actually wonderful. It's the exact opposite that everyone thinks, and it's probably somewhere in between, right? Because I don't think anyone's life experience is going to be like, oh, I was essentially the second coming of Christ, or what, you know what I mean? It's like I think that's absolute horse shit. Um, I don't have any more written questions for you, but what I always love to ask people is kind of what their literary influences are. And this doesn't have to be in the underground scene. I think most people tend to harken back a little bit before their peers, right? But I'm
Yeah.
curious, when you first got into literature, I'm assuming at a younger age than you are now, like what was that like, oh, this lit a fire in me type of book?
You know, there were a few. I didn't really get a lot out of reading until I read The Great Gatsby, which I know my friend Blake Butler really hates that book and thinks that Fitzgerald sucks. But it really like, it was the first time that I saw a narrator that was like me. You know what I mean? Like, and I remember I failed the course in high school that was reading it, because when the teacher asked me about the book, what I talked about was like the kind of writing in it and the sort of like the imagery. And so they were like, "You don't know anything about this book. You're just like talking out your ass." And I was like, "No, like, you know what I mean? It's the last sentence of the book with the boats being beat back against the currents." I was like, "What?" You know what I mean? Like, this makes me feel
Yeah.
something. Like, this makes me like think about life and America and rich people and poor people. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things that really like hit me in a way that I couldn't describe at the time. And Moby Dick was a huge one for me too, because, I was an angry young kid, which is probably how I got into punk and hardcore. I was a pretty angry person. And I really loved Ahab as a character. I really loved revenge. Like, I really wanted to read more about revenge. I was super into it.
I'm embarrassed to say I've not read that book. It's on my
Dude,
list, but yeah.
there's a lot that you have to get through because it's of a different time. And there's like a whole section that's kind of like absurd. There's like a whole section about whaling that's so absurd to get through. But the revenge part of the book and like how it gets into what it does to your soul is so awesome. Um, but that's not like, I kind of read those and was like, that's cool, whatever. Music's
Uh-huh.
better. You know what I mean? And, and then
It
when I got
probably
to,
is, especially as a career choice. I don't know.
but when I got to college, it was DeLillo, like really hit me
Yeah.
hard. And that really like changed the way, like, where I was like, wait, maybe like writing actually is cool. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about it. Like, then I got into like JG Ballard and I was like, yo, there's all kinds of sick stuff in writing. You know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of stuff that's like wrong. This is sick. You know what I mean? Because I was a kid that was into Nine Inch Nails and Coil and Throbbing Gristle. So I liked stuff that was like wrong, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then when I found these writers who were like also kind of wrong, but somehow were like sneaking it into like the academic or whatever, I was into that too. So those were some really early influences. And then like kind of on a more poetic like side, it was like Frank O'Hara really meant a lot to me. The beats like Ginsberg, Jim Carroll was a huge influence. I saw him read as a kid. I saw him read at the St. Mark's Church and
Really?
sat in the same row as Ginsberg. He actually said something really lewd to me. I was very young. Um, um,
I absolutely believe you.
and so like yeah, there's a lot of different stuff. Dennis Johnson's a big influence on me, especially writing
Okay.
about drugs. It's very very easy to see that. Um, and then as an adult, I tried to get a little more into humorous stuff because I tend to be like what people would call an overly serious person. Um, so like the stuff that appealed to me writing someone who isn't me writing Swim was like Sheila Heti and Scott McClanahan and just like stuff that made me laugh. It changed the way I thought about stuff. I was like, oh, my book can be a lot deeper and more soulful if it doesn't take itself as seriously. You know what I mean? If there is some element of like, I don't fucking know. You know what I mean?
Hold on, with Scott McClanahan, I've only read the Sarah book, which I think is extraordinary, and I think
Masterpiece.
yeah,
Yeah.
everyone who's read it kind of has that opinion. And you're right, it's funny. That is also a devastating book. I think it's a novel more than a memoir. But have
Yeah.
you read other of his works? Are
Oh,
they more
yeah.
like funny? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, they take turns. All his
Okay,
stuff, it's like one story and then is like super funny, and the next story is like the same story but really fucked up and sad, and you can see like where it's going.
okay,
I think Crapalacia is incredible. There's also, if you even think about the title, it's pretty funny. Like Hill William, it's like I'm a hillbilly, but like I'm like an educated. I'm a Hill William. I'm like the that's
okay.
so yeah. No, Scott, he doesn't miss, man. He's so good. And actually, like I did a reading with him in Chelsea where he wanted to be the first reader. kind of like a like I'm not like the
Yeah,
headliner,
interesting. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm the
okay.
opener. And he opened with this story that literally everybody in the place at one point was dying laughing, and at the end of it, everybody was bawling laughing to where like Chelsea was like, I can't go next. I'm crying too hard. Like you gotta somebody else has got to go up there. It was so beautiful. And I think his next book of short stories has this story in it. It's like one of the best short stories I've ever heard in my life. So I can't wait.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll have to
Yeah.
look out for that. All right. Well, we
Yeah.
got like 3 minutes left. Do you want to hype anything? I know you have the audiobook coming out. You're also, what, in all these other music projects that I keep hearing about? I don't know, man. Tell me what's going
Yeah.
on.
I don't know. I don't know when this will come out, but I'll be in Philadelphia at the end of the month with my friends in Ink and Dagger, doing some stuff with them. Um, so that's like I don't want to be the guy that breaks that news, but I think a lot of people assume it because I did it the last time, but I am doing some of it this time, and that band matters a lot to me. They were the band that made me want to play music myself. Tom from Thursday and I decided to start Thursday at an Ink and Dagger show because we were like, it
Wow.
all hardcore doesn't need to be like this, like, one thing. You could also put psychedelia into it. You could be dangerous. You could say things that aren't positive. You could be negative. You know what I mean? There was like a lot of stuff that we were like, let's do hardcore like this, And then we ended up being like a more romantic, Cure
Yeah.
influenced band. But like at the time, we thought we were starting a band like Ink and Dagger.
That's very cool. So
So
it's not all Madball from here on out. Okay.
not unfortunately not. I do love Madball and saw them many times as a kid, but yeah.
Uh, Well, that's really cool. I don't think even if you broke the news here that that's going to do much because this is a small literary podcast, and probably most of that audience doesn't give a shit, but maybe a few of them do. I think that's very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. This has been wonderful. I hope that everyone goes out and buys your book, even as it's in
Thanks,
second,
Chris.
third year. What is how long ago did
Yeah,
uh,
it's this. I guess this is starting the third year, and the 11th. We're on the 11th printing right now. So
wow.
yeah,
Well, good for you.
crazy. Thanks. Yeah,
And it's well
Chelsea.
deserved, man.
Chelsea, she's a powerhouse, man.
Yeah,
Everybody loves supporting her. It's awesome.
absolutely. All right, man. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you again,
You
and
too, Chris.
hopefully
So
I'll
great
see you around
talking
the
to you,
internet.
man.
Take care.
Love that. Bye.